Hi YouTube, this is Evie. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today I would like to discuss how to interact with doctors, nurses, people in the ER, EMTs, therapists, etc. that you may have to deal with as a kinky person. This is not at all a unique situation. This is something that most people at some point being in the kink community practicing BDSM will have to deal with at some point. It's just a fact of life. It's going to happen. But the idea of having to interact with these people and having to divulge some very personal, private parts of your life to them can feel very vulnerable. It can be risky. You obviously don't want to overshare. You don't want to put them in a situation where they think that you are in a domestic violence or an abusive relationship. You don't want to cause any misunderstandings, and you don't necessarily want to have to answer more questions than you need to in order for them to be able to do their job. One of the most common ways, and the first way that I want to talk about, is let's say you had a really great impact play scene. You had a really great spanking, you had a great whipping, and shit, you have a doctor's appointment tomorrow and you're still going to be covered in marks, you're going to have huge bruises. What do you do? Well, first things first is you should always be proactive. And this goes mostly for situations where if you're going to be in a gown and they're going to be in a situation where they're going to see your back or whatever area has the fresh marks on it, be proactive. If you're in a situation where, let's say you're going for a checkup, you're going in for some kind of thing where you would have to be in a gown and they're potentially going to be seeing those marks, wherever they happen to be in your body, but usually they do tend to be on the back, and that's going to be exposed in some way, I would be sure to tell them and be proactive. That is the key thing that you can be, is proactive and be truthful. Before you start the appointment, when the doctor actually comes in, let them know, like, I know we're doing a checkup today. Just so you know, I do have some marks, in XYZ place on my body as a result of some consensual BDSM play that I have done. I am not being abused. This is not the result of domestic violence. If you have any questions or concerns that you would like to raise with me, please do. I would be happy to help answer those for you. Different medical professionals obviously do have different levels of experience with BDSM in terms of like experience they've had with patients, and there are a lot of kinky doctors and nurses out there, to be sure, but most of them, as long as they hear keywords that don't make them feel like it's a domestic violence situation, they probably don't care what kinky shit you get up to in your bedroom. They really don't. That's not part of their job. They're just here to make sure that you are healthy internally and externally, and some superficial bruises on your ass is really not part of the scope of something that they're going to be concerned about. Now, different people obviously do play different ways, and if you're somebody who has marks on your face, like a black eye, if you've done a frontal whipping, if you've done something that may be sort of on an unusual area of the body for BDSM, you definitely need to make sure that you are explicit about it not being abuse if you do play with those areas, because especially around the face, the throat, the front of the body, those are going to be areas that are typical for domestic violence that people who are medical professionals may not immediately recognize as being consensual BDSM, the same way some redness or some light bruising on an ass might signal, okay, this is probably BDSM and not an abusive situation. You don't necessarily need to talk about it if you're just in a situation where, let's say, you're getting a shot, you're going to get a blood drawn, something like that. If you have rope marks around your arm or something, there's probably really no reason to bring it up. If they ask you about it, or you've ligature marks somewhere or whatever, be honest. Always be honest. Even if you're not able to be proactive about it because you don't think it's going to come up, be as clear as you can and be as consistent with your story as you can. Because again, that's one of the key parts of BDSM that separates it from domestic violence. If you can be proactive, if you can have a consistent story, and it's a story that you and your partner or anybody else who may have been involved can agree on and share, that is going to have a lot better outcome for you than being inconsistent, about lying, about trying to cover it up, because honestly, they don't really care if you did a BDSM scene, but if you're always telling them, oh, I fell down the stairs, oh, I tripped, oh, I fell down the stairs. That's something that'll happen a lot when people are trying to cover up domestic violence, is they lie, they don't have a consistent story, they try to conceal or cover up either with makeup or literally try to conceal what they have experienced because it's shameful, it makes them feel guilty, they don't want to get their abuser in trouble, etc. They don't want to make it worse for themselves. So that's just something to keep in mind, but really it shouldn't be that much of a problem. They're probably just going to keep on going with their day. It's not their job to regulate what you do in the bedroom. Now, there are other situations where you may have to deal with a doctor as somebody who does BDSM. Namely, if you're in a situation where a scene goes wrong and you potentially have to call an ambulance, go to the emergency room, something like that. Now, If you are in a situation where that is the case, where a scene has gone wrong and you believe you may need to call an ambulance or you believe you may need to go to the ER, please, 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 please do. Please, 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 please. There is no reason to believe that if you call an ambulance because a BDSM scene has gone wrong, they're going to bring the police with them. There's no reason why you have to hide it. You should lie about it or conceal it. If you're in a situation where you need emergency medical care because of a BDSM scene, please go and get it. Please do not put yourself in jeopardy. Please do not put your partner in jeopardy. Please do not put the people around you are doing a scene with in jeopardy because you are too afraid to call an ambulance because you're afraid of the repercussions. People who are EMTs, people who are emergency room surgeons, people who are emergency room nurses or doctors, they do not care about how the thing happened necessarily. They care about getting you the help that you need in that moment. They care about making you well. It's the same thing that happens when people experience drug overdoses, right? They are not there to arrest you. They are not there to tattle on you to the police. They are not there to do any of that. They do not care about, if it was, oh man, I don't know what's happening. I don't know how I got all those drugs, man. Like, they're not there to arrest you. They don't care about why, that thing happened, why your suspension rig failed and, now you have a broken arm or whatever. They don't care about that. They just want to make sure that you get better. They want to make sure that they are addressing you with appropriate medical treatment, which is, again, why it's very important to be honest and proactive. If you do have to go to an emergency room or call an ambulance, stick with a consistent story. Make sure that story is as honest as you possibly can make it. Retain any of the things that contributed to the medical event happening, if you will. So, for example, if you happen to do a scene where you think it's really hot to get pepper sprayed in the eye and it feels like you're going blind in one of your eyes, please keep the pepper spray around. Don't lie and say it wasn't pepper spray, because how they are going to address the thing that's happening to you is going to be a factor of, okay, what actually caused this from happening? They just want to help you get better, and that is the long and the short of it. When it comes to dealing with therapists, this is a bit of a unique situation because unlike doctors and EMTs and that sort of thing, we have a lot more choice when it comes to who we go to with mental health issues. And it can be difficult to find a therapist who is actually privy to and aware of BDSM, but not in the way where they will blame your mental health issues on it. And everybody who's into BDSM has a different mental health profile. They have different reasons for wanting to go into therapy. And it only can be difficult to find somebody in your area who's available, who's in a price range you can afford, who's covered by your insurance, who specializes or has experience with whatever issue you're dealing with, but that is also kink-friendly, trans-friendly, queer-friendly, poly-friendly, whatever your other axes of weirdness are, if you will, that has experience with those, who accept them as part of you, but not part of what's contributing to your mental illness or a result of your mental illness. There are resources and searches you can do where you can find people who are kink aware and kink friendly. I will put a link to those down below in the description box if I can find them again. But there are ways where you can find people who are therapists who are aware of kink. Now, again, it is difficult to find people like this. So if you're not able to find somebody in your area who you know is already kink aware, kink friendly, and kind of just have to go to somebody, I would definitely bring it up probably within the first couple sessions if you can, what your kink interests are, so that way you can gauge their reaction, because you don't want to go through a year of therapy having to hide this huge part of your life and these activities that you do, or use code words or conceal them in some way, because they're not going to be able to help you with your issues if they do not have a full understanding of you as a person. And even if your BDSM interests or your BDSM activities are not a result of or contributing factor to your mental illnesses, they do still affect who you are as a person. And that will help inform them of some things that they can do to help you with whatever it is you happen to be struggling with or whatever illness you happen to be dealing with. So I would just bring it up at some point. You don't have to go on a long diatribe about it. You basically don't want to make too big of a deal about it, because if you try to make it into this big dramatic thing, at least in my head, I feel like that could be perceived as like the therapist is going to be like, oh, I see, we're having a big revelation here. And they're going to write it all down. And they're going to be like, oh, yes, I see. The reason why they have this anxiety disorder is because they, have an innate urge to please, which they have, brought into the form of submission as opposed to really addressing their, anxious perfectionist needs or whatever it is. If you try to make a big deal out of it as opposed to just casually bringing it up, it can make it seem like a bigger deal than it is, and then they can overreact. But if you bring it up in sort of smaller pieces, like you mentioned that you did a scene one weekend. You mentioned things about your partner being in a BDSM lifestyle. You kind of baby step into it and then gauge their reactions and gauge where they try to take the conversation from that point. If they try to lead it into a discussion of your mental illness, if they are trying to do some kind of technique where they're trying to get you to realize that like this BDSM is like the result of your illness, or that you should stop doing it because it's unhealthy, blah blah blah. Now there are situations where people do take BDSM too far, use it as a coping mechanism, as a way to avoid problems as opposed to addressing them. Those are all valid things that your therapist may be able to help you with, that people do in BDSM. It is true. People in BDSM do sometimes use it as an unhealthy coping mechanism. There are ways that people use it. They rely on it too much, as any other kind of over-medicating that they might do to try to avoid addressing a problem. It happens. But there's a difference between that and believing that there's a direct correlation between your mental illness and your activities in BDSM, or believing that your desires as a masochist or a sadist are actually a form of mental illness. Now, there are clinical definitions for somebody who is a clinical sadist or somebody who is a clinical masochist, but those are completely different in a lot of ways than people who are simply masochists and sadists in the BDSM way of thinking about it. But hopefully, and I believe, more people who are coming up as therapists, newer therapists, younger therapists, are learning more about BDSM, are learning more about kink lifestyles, are learning more about the transgender experience, the queer experience, the poly experience, as opposed to just, people who were doing this 40, 50 years ago. Not that those people can change, and not that everybody who's an older therapist will believe that kink and BDSM are evil, because it's not the case, but it is probably more likely that a younger and newer therapist will have a more broader understanding of you being in BDSM than somebody who is not. Now, the last situation I want to talk about is dealing with police officers and other law enforcement agents, if you will. This is something that is trickier, I think, than the other ones, because there are so many situations where it could come up. Please do not take legal advice from me. Oh dear God, please do not take legal advice from me. I am not a lawyer. Please don't take legal advice from me. I can only talk about my own personal experience with this to the best of my ability. And what I would say is, it is always your best option to be honest, clear, and concise about the facts of the situation as you can. If there is a situation where you are doing a lot of scenes and your girlfriend or your boyfriend is screaming constantly every other night from your impact play scenes, and then your neighbor then believes that you may be in an abusive situation and they call the police on you and they do a checkup, be honest and clear about what happened. Be honest and clear about what caused it to happen. Make sure that everybody around you has a complete and honest story that they all agree on. The worst thing you can possibly do is have other people around you, especially if you're dealing in a situation where a police officer is called to a party, where there's a lot of people all doing various BDSM activities. Some people may try to spin it a different way. Try to get everybody on the same page. Try that honesty, please. Be as honest as you can about the situation if they ask questions, because the last thing you need is different people telling a million different stories, because it's going to look more and more suspicious, and it's not going to help you, and it's not going to get them to leave you alone any faster. So just be as clear and concise as you can. Know that if you are doing this and everybody is of age, everybody's doing it consensually, there's really not any risk of you getting arrested or having, any sort of legal ramifications as a result. Depending on where you live, I cannot speak for every single location. There are definitely some quirks of state and county and city laws that may be different as to how they interpret or enforce laws around, sexual violence and BDSM, so be aware of that. But like with all things, really just be honest, be concise, make sure everybody is on the same page. Lying is the worst thing you could possibly do. Because if it is a situation where you end up being taken to court, or you're served a ticket or something, if you change your story multiple times, like if you lie at first and then you tell a half truth and then you tell the full truth, that's not going to look good for you. So just start with the truth first and then continue with that for as long as you can, the entire time that they happen to be interacting with you. And just like nurses or doctors, they are trained to be aware of and look for signs of domestic violence. And as long as you are not exhibiting those signs, as long as you are using language and you are talking about the situation that is different from maybe what would be typical for domestic violence, they're probably going to draw their own conclusions and determine that this wasn't a domestic violence situation. Somebody really wasn't being, murdered live on TV, etc. So hopefully this gave you guys some help and some perspective. Dealing with all these things can be really complex, again, because every individual situation is different. Every reason these things might come up is different, but hopefully you found it helpful. If you did have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave that down in the comment section below. If you want to see more from me, please feel free to follow me on my social media. Link will be down in the description box. If you haven't already and you want to, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week. If you want to support this channel because you really like what I do and you want access to exclusive content, more videos, photos, etc., please do consider going to my Patreon. I will link that down below in the description box, as well as over here if you guys want to check it out. And until I see you guys next time, have a great rest of your day and do a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.